All children, except one, grow up. We've all heard that enchanting promise. Peter Pan, the eternal boy who can fly, battle pirates, and dance with fairies, feels like an escape from time itself. But what if the boy who never grows up isn't celebrating eternal youth? What if Peter Pan is mourning children who never had the chance to become adults at all? Imagine a Victorian nursery by candlelight, lace curtains fluttering in a cold draught, the faint scent of polished wood and lavender, an oil lamp casting long shadows on a row of porcelain dolls. A child's laugh echoes through the room and slowly fades. Into this scene walks J.M. Barrie, a slight man with watchful eyes and the gait of someone half in the present, half somewhere else. He sits by the fire and spins a tale. His voice is gentle, almost conspiratorial, coaxing his young listeners into a world where they can fly out of the window and be free. It sounds like pure magic, yet hidden in his words are hints of something ancient and ominous. In Barrie's book, Peter and Wendy, there is a line almost always overlooked in modern retellings. It says that when children die, Peter goes part of the way with them, so they won't be frightened. In the same book, Peter explains to Wendy how lost boys arrive in Neverland. They aren't volunteer adventurers. They are children who fall out of their perambulators' prams when their nurse looks away. If mothers don't claim them within 7 days, they are spirited off to Peter's Island. Girls are rarely there because, according to Peter, girls are too clever to fall. Later, Barrie writes that the number of boys on the island changes because some get killed and that Peter thins them out when they start to grow up. On the surface, the language is whimsical. In context, it is chilling. Growing up becomes a crime punishable by death. The boy who refuses to age also refuses to allow others to mature beside him. To understand why Barrie laced a children's fantasy with such darkness, we need to step outside the nursery and into the streets of Victorian London. The city was crowded and filthy. Slums swarmed with children playing among refuse, their feet bare even in winter. Chimney sweeps, many no older than 5, climbed soot-filled stacks, their lungs burning. Factories roared day and night, swallowing child workers as young as 8. Diseases like smallpox, measles, scarlet fever and diphtheria stalked every alley. Doctors were few, antibiotics non-existent. Parents often counted their children with an unspoken understanding that not all would survive. Death certificates list haunting causes: convulsions, teething, failure to thrive. Even in wealthier neighbourhoods, prams trundled along cobbled streets where horses spooked and carriages toppled. Newspapers reported accidents with grim regularity: toddlers falling into sewers, infants suffocated in their beds, children crushed by drays. 1 out of every 6 infants died before their first birthday. Before vaccines, before penicillin, before labour laws, childhood was precarious. This environment bred a peculiar cultural response. Victorians idolised childhood at the same time they sent children to work in mines and mills. Artists painted cherubic faces with flushed cheeks and golden curls. Photographers posed dead infants as if sleeping peacefully, while heartbroken mothers smiled wanly for the camera. Mourning jewellery encased tiny curls of hair behind glass. Memorial cards depicted children as angels ascending to heaven. Grief was everywhere, but so was an almost manic insistence on sweetness and innocence. In this context, the idea of a child who never grows up resonated deeply not because it represented fun and games, but because it mirrored the reality of children who died young. For Barry, the spectre of death was not abstract. He was the ninth of 10 children in a working-class Scottish family. When he was 6, his older brother David, his mother's favourite, died in a skating accident just a week shy of his 14th birthday. David was everything Barry was not: athletic, cheerful, exuberant. His death shattered their mother, Margaret Ogilvy, who took to her bed in grief. Barry later recounted how she drew some comfort from the belief that David would remain a boy forever, frozen at 13, never to leave her for a wife or a job. The young Barry tried to fill David's place, wearing his clothes and sitting quietly by his mother's bedside. He would creep into her room and listen to her talk about David as if he were just upstairs. It was here, in this strange arrangement of reality and fantasy, that the seeds of Peter Pan were sown. Barry learned to equate death with arrested development, tragedy with imagination. Small for his age and insecure about his height, he never grew taller than 5 feet 3. Barry cultivated a youthful persona even into adulthood. Schoolmates called him Wee Barry. He loved pantomimes and fairy tales, preferring children's company to adults. Yet he was also ambitious. Moving to London, he became a journalist and a playwright, honing his ability to tell stories that captivated audiences. He wrote about hardy Scottish fishermen and sentimental Londoners, blending humour with melancholy. His marriage to actress Mary Ansell was affectionate but childless. They kept a St. Bernard named Porthos, who slept in a cot at the foot of their bed, an early inspiration for Nana, the darling family's canine nurse. It was through his dog that Barry met the Llewelyn Davies family in 1897. One afternoon in Kensington Gardens, his dog bounded up to Sylvia Llewelyn Davies and her sons, who were playing by the Serpentine. Sylvia was luminous, artistic, married to Arthur Llewelyn Davies, a barrister from a distinguished family. Their boys, George, John, known as Jack, Peter, Michael, and Nicholas, called Nico, were handsome and lively, their imaginations as wild as Barry's own. Barry, then in his late 30s, became besotted. He told them stories about fairies who lived in the park, about pirates who prowled the Serpentine, and about a baby named Peter who could fly. He brought them gifts: a sailing boat christened the Llewelyn Davies, elaborate toys, costumes for their games. He took them to plays and wrote letters addressed to each boy individually, filled with drawings and riddles. The boys responded with equal affection, calling him Uncle Jim and begging for more stories. In the world of those children, Barry found an escape from adult disappointments and an opportunity to be the playful father he yearned to be. He also found muses. Barry later joked that he made Peter Pan by rubbing the 5 of you together. George contributed Peter's swagger, Jack his practicality, Peter, the real boy, his name, Michael, his dreaminess, and Nico, his sweetness. When Barry wrote the first play about Peter Pan in 1904, he dedicated it to the boys. It was an instant sensation, enchanting audiences with wire-bound flying effects and a story that balanced whimsy with an undercurrent of sorrow. Children laughed and clapped when Peter asked them to save Tinker Bell by believing in fairies. Adults wiped away tears when Wendy tucked her brothers in at bedtime. Barry gave away the play's copyright to the Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children, ensuring that it would fund pediatric medicine for decades. Yet even as he created a world of eternal youth, Barry's real-life lost boys were marching toward adulthood and danger. Arthur Llewellyn Davies was diagnosed with cancer and died in 1907. Sylvia fell ill and died in 1910. On her deathbed, she may or may not have asked Barry to help care for her sons. Either way, Barry altered her will to list him as one of their guardians. He paid their school fees, bought them clothes, took them on holidays to his country house, Black Lake Cottage. He posed for family photographs in which he stands in the back row, stiff and watchful, while the boys drape themselves around him like vines. Then came the First World War. George, the eldest and most charismatic, enlisted straight from Eton. Barry, like so many guardians, watched with pride and dread. Letters from the trenches arrived, filled with cheerful bravado and descriptions of mud, rats, and shell fire. In March 1915, George was shot through the head near St. Omer. He was 21. When Barry received the telegram, he was devastated. He wrote to a friend that it felt as though life had been cramped. He lost not only a surrogate son, but a living piece of Peter Pan. Michael, often considered the real-life embodiment of Peter Pan, was extremely close to Barry. Sensitive, artistic, prone to melancholy, Michael thrived on Barry's attention. Barry took him on trips to their cottage and wrote him letters full of pet names and coded language. Michael went to Oxford, where he excelled academically and socially. Then, in May 1921, while vacationing in Devon with his friend Rupert Buxton, he drowned in the Thames near Sandford Lock. He was shy of his 21st birthday. The circumstances remain mysterious. Some speculate it was a joint suicide pact. Barry, who identified most with Michael, never recovered. In Michael's death, he saw the ultimate expression of his own story. The boy who never grew up. The other brothers' lives were also shadowed by Peter Pan. Peter, third born, lent his name to the character but disliked the association. Throughout his life he battled depression, partly due to the fame attached to his name. He published a memoir of his family, J.M. Barrie and the Lost Boys, but later died by suicide in 1960, describing the story as a terrible masterpiece. Jack, a naval officer, married and had children, but kept his distance from Barry. Nico lived the longest. He died in 1980. He defended Barry against accusations of impropriety, insisting that Uncle Jim was an innocent. Still, all the brothers struggled with being publicly viewed as the Lost Boys, their personal identities subsumed by a fictional myth. Barry himself aged physically, but remained psychologically tethered to childhood. He wore rumpled suits, his hair perpetually uncombed, his voice soft and boyish. Friends described him as gentle, yet obsessive. His marriage to Mary Ansell deteriorated. She had an affair and eventually left him. Barry later married Sylvia, but after her death he became a widower in all but name. His relationships with women were platonic, his emotional life dominated by children, his own siblings, his wife's dog, the Llewellyn Davies boys. This pattern fuels speculation about his sexual orientation. Biographers have argued he may have been asexual, or at least profoundly ambivalent about adult intimacy. What is clear is that he felt most at ease with children, who accepted his flights of fancy without question. What does it mean, then, that Barry cast Peter as the escort of dead children? In Celtic folklore, there are figures like the psychopomp who guide souls to the other world. Barry grew up in Kirriemuir, a town steeped in such beliefs. Giving Peter this role elevates him from mischief maker to guardian of souls. Neverland, with its magical islands, mermaids, lagoons, and Indian camps, begins to resemble limbo, a place where lost children play until it is time to move on. Barry might not have consciously mapped Christian or pagan cosmology onto his story, but the archetypes are powerful. Children who die young become fairies or stars in the heavens. Wendy, on leaving Neverland, asks what will happen to the lost boys. Peter tells her not to worry. What else can he say? To admit the reality of their fate would break the spell. There is another symbol worth unpacking: the crocodile. Hook's greatest fear, the crocodile swallowed a ticking clock, and the sound haunts him. Time, literally, is out to devour him. For adults, the crocodile is midlife, mortality, missed opportunities. For Hook, a man consumed by revenge and stuck. In ritual good form, at all costs, the crocodile's ticking reminds him that he cannot outrun death. Peter, by contrast, doesn't hear the clock. He doesn't fear time because it has no meaning for him. This makes him powerful, but also monstrous. Without a sense of time, he cannot learn from the past or plan for the future. The crocodile's hunger and the clock inside it underscore a truth that Barry's story grapples with. Time is a predator that all must confront. Pretending otherwise doesn't stop it from coming. As the decades passed, Barry's feelings about his creation became more complicated. In his notebooks, he reflected that only after writing Peter Pan did its true meaning come to him. It was a desperate attempt to grow up. Some days he described the story with pride, other days with dread. He worried that by celebrating childhood, he had made it seem possible to avoid adulthood altogether. He wrote to one friend that he might have done children harm by suggesting that perpetual youth was desirable. During the Second World War, he was asked to revive Peter Pan to raise morale. He declined, perhaps sensing that in times of real danger, escapism is less helpful than resolve. Yet he could not resist writing further stories about his characters, revisiting them in plays and novels like Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens. It was as if he were caught in the same loop as his creation, returning again and again to a fantasy that both comforted and haunted him. The world, meanwhile, did not stand still. New generations found different meanings in Peter Pan. Modern readers reinterpret Peter as a symbol of trauma, a boy stuck at the age when something terrible happened. Psychologists identify the Peter Pan syndrome in men who refuse to take on adult responsibilities. Writers like Christina Henry in her novel Lost Boy recast Peter as a cult leader, luring boys away to serve his ego and forcing them to fight to the death. Others see in Hook's fear of the crocodile an allegory for aging and the desperation to maintain youth. Barry himself might have smiled at these interpretations. He always said his characters belonged to the world. So why does the story persist? Perhaps because it channels a universal ambivalence about growing up. On the one hand, we long for the freedoms of childhood, imagination, play, lack of responsibility. On the other hand, we recognize that staying a child forever would be a tragedy. Without adulthood, we cannot form deep relationships, contribute to society, or gain wisdom. The narrator of Peter and Wendy invites us to participate in the fantasy and then forces us to confront its cost. Wendy returns home, becomes a mother, and tells her daughter about Peter. She grows old and gains depth. Peter remains the same and feels only fleeting sadness when he sees her aged face. He quickly shifts his attention to her daughter. Barry's message seems to be that eternal childhood is seductive but empty. Real life, with its love and loss, is richer. We can also consider the ethical implications of Barry giving the copyright of Peter Pan to a children's hospital. On one level, it was an act of generosity. The hospital has received royalties from performances of the play ever since, funding care for sick children. But on another level, it solidifies the link between the story and illness. A tale about children who can fly and escape death becomes a fundraiser for those who cannot. That alignment underscores the story's bittersweet nature. We dream of Neverland, but our feet remain on the ground. Today, we still grapple with the tension between protecting children and exploiting their innocence. We plaster images of our kids on social media, chasing likes and building personal brands. We pressure teenagers to be perfect students, athletes, and activists. We venerate youth while dreading our own aging bodies. Barry's story reminds us that idealizing childhood can be as dangerous as neglecting it. The Lost Boys are beloved because they never age, but they are also imprisoned. They die and are replaced without ceremony. Their individuality is secondary to the role they play in Peter's adventures. It is a cautionary tale about objectifying children, even in the name of love. In reflecting on Peter Pan, we would do well to remember the real people behind the myth. There was James Matthew Barry, a boy who tried to take the place of a dead brother, who found solace in stories, and who poured his grief into a play. There were the Llewellyn Davies boys, each with his own dreams and struggles. George, charming and brave, whose life ended in a trench in France. Jack, responsible and quiet, who distanced himself from the story's shadow. Peter, introspective and sensitive, who despised being called the boy who wouldn't grow up. Michael, intuitive and artistic, who drowned in still water with his friend. Nico, gentle and protective, who lived to defend Barry's name. They are more than characters. They are reminders that behind every story are real lives. There were also the countless unnamed children whose deaths filled the newspapers of Barry's youth. Babies who succumbed to illness. Toddlers who fell from windows. Little ones crushed by carts. Adolescents conscripted to war. Their parents, like Barry's mother, comforted themselves with the thought of their children forever young in heaven or some fairyland. Barry gave their grief a narrative home. But we, with modern medicine and knowledge, have the power to change the story. Rather than retreating into fantasies, we can advocate for policies that reduce child mortality, improve healthcare, and combat poverty. We can honor those lost by fighting for those still here. So the next time you think of Peter Pan, think beyond the flying and the pirates. Think of the boy who walks with dead children so they won't be frightened. Think of a mother whispering to herself that her dead son will never grow up and leave her. Think of 5 brothers playing in a park, one of whom will later call their story a curse. Think of a man wrestling with his own inability to grow. Remember that to the Victorians, eternal childhood often meant death. The story endures because it channels grief into mythology and allows us to imagine our lost loved ones as forever young and happy. But it also exposes the danger of clinging to that fantasy. True growth comes from facing mortality, honoring the past, and protecting those who still have the chance to become adults. In the end, perhaps the real magic is not in never growing up, but in growing up with compassion and ensuring that fewer children's stories end too soon.